this one is the conclusory, I think that's a word, episode to the Myth of Failure series. And it's called the risk seesaw, the principle to discuss today. And I want to lead with the story, if you've ever heard of Jim Carrey's dad. Did you know that one?
No.
Jim Carrey, famous actor and comedian.
Yep.
Started as a comedian. So Jim Carrey tells a story about his dad, how his dad also could have been a comedian, apparently a very funny man too, but thought that that was not quite the safe kind of career path. So he became an accountant instead. And because that was, job security.
Safe, yep.
Except the only thing was that when Carrey was about 12, his dad actually lost his job. And then they fell on really hard times. And the so-called safe thing turned out to not be so safe. And so it's very interesting. He goes, you can fail at doing something you don't like or a plan B. So you might as well have a crack at doing something you love or that you think is worth doing. It's very interesting. So the idea of the risk seesaw, I first thought about this, talked about it when we were doing Taleb episodes the first time. Nassim Taleb, if you're listening.
Taleb, yeah. You never said
that was fucking smooth, man. That was fucking smooth.
Okay. Let's ignore that. From
a lot of his principles, it's just a lot of the things he talks about, the examples he uses, makes you think of this particular thing where I couldn't find a way of thinking about it. If you imagine a seesaw, when one end goes up, the other one goes down, and vice versa, and they can't both be up at the same time. And it's the idea that when you control for short-term risks, you create long-term risks. When I say control, you try to remove, right? You try and get rid of the possibility of said bad thing happening. You actually create a much bigger risk somewhere long-term, bigger, way worse. Okay. And then if you do the opposite, you get the opposite effect. If you actually try to control for long-term risks, you will actually increase the likelihood of short-term risks, right? So we're living in the beautiful, conceptual level, but we give examples, right?
Have we given the Taleb example?
Which one are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of the taxi driver versus...
Yeah. We've talked about it before, but bring it up. Do you remember it?
Yeah, well, it's a... just because I'm rereading Taleb at the moment, there's the example he gives, the bureaucrat. I don't know. Yeah. He loves picking on bureaucrats, but the bureaucrat that has a steady income.
Yeah, banking job, I think.
Banking job. In
this example, yeah.
Monthly. I'm not sure specifically.
Consistent salary.
Yeah, consistent salary versus the taxi driver that has sort of volatility in their salary.
Yeah.
The perception is that the banker has more security, but is in an event, like an unforeseen event that he calls Black Swan event.
Yeah. Imagine the GFC
or something.
I don't know if that is a black swan, but a big unexpected event. Yeah.
Yeah. So that person loses their job and then finds it much more difficult to get work because they've locked into something quite specific.
Yeah.
They
probably haven't had to improve. They probably haven't had to do much to keep their job. So
those sorts of things.
They don't know. They don't have any real skills. Yeah.
Yeah. So that person's out of work, and the taxi driver, if they don't get a fare, they just go look for another fare, and they've gotten used to always having work, and the flow of income's not as consistent. But long term, they're more anti-fragile, like Taleb
or
says,
robust, whichever.
Yeah, to volatility.
Yep.
So there's the perception that because they're not getting income at a very specific time, that it's more risky. But in fact, it's not.
Yeah, not in the big picture view.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that small hurt, avoid. It's like a stitch in time saves 9. Same kind of idea. I think it builds on this principle. Short-term hurt, healthy hurt, avoid long-term hurt. You know what I mean? But what he says in that example, the banker's risks are not hidden. It's not that they're not there. They're just hidden from the banker. That's the perfect risk seesaw, right? You've controlled for risk in the short term. What you've done, you've tilted the seesaw so that it's going to happen on a bigger level unforeseen, and smack in the face. The taxi driver is always learning where business is and where it's not.
Yeah.
Because his feedback loop is more real, right? If he's not doing well, he gets that feedback. Most people at work don't actually get the live feedback loop of their performance. Because, like everything gets complicated. You have a manager who's not like the bloody CEO, so they might just be happy with the way things are. Maybe they want to coast. Maybe they just think you're a nice guy. You got 1,000,001 reasons, right? Bureaucracy is and so you don't actually get as much sometimes the feedback loop of whether you're doing good or bad. You should do. Taxi driver has to. So if he doesn't get work for a week, he has to find a better spot or a better time of day to drive, go to the airport. It's like, always people need a cab at the airport. I'll go to the airport. It'll always be work. He learns. In a recession, people are still coming to the airport.
Yep.
Been a recession, a lot of the bullshit jobs people have sometimes get very well hidden in the corporate world.
Yep.
Hard to know when you don't have a bullshit job sometimes, or you're not needed, so they can get rid of you. So what I found this powerful, realizing it in personal examples, because I think the things most people think about, the things most people worry about, feel like the big risks. They feel like the other end of the seesaw. But I fear that most people mistake big risks to actually be small risks. Sorry, that what they think are big risks are actually small risks in the big picture of the life they'll live. And the Jim Carrey's dad example is like that. He's trying to control for small risks, which is consistency of income. But we don't know Jim Carrey's dad personally, whether he's actually interested in it or not. It's like a very anecdotal, right, story. But in another sense, he creates much bigger risks. And it's an example of that bubble burst. A lot of people probably, the bubble doesn't burst, and that's probably the worst thing for them. Coming back to Slingshot, coming back to the Chinese farmer. That's why we tried to build these ideas in the series, and this is kind of the culmination. So when I think about it, I'm not going to sit here and pretend. I was on a call with someone and listened to the podcast last night, and I said, I am like you, trying to figure out life. I don't have it all. I don't have everything. Like, I have everything, but I don't have what society says is everything. Okay? And if you're going by society's scorecard, skewed as it might be, I'm probably losing. I'm probably below average by this societal scorecard. So I don't pretend to have an abundance of everything. I feel like I have an abundance of things that matter, and I'm very lucky and fortunate. It's not all my own doing. So come to the obvious one, finances, money, income. And it's easy to think about, I won't have a kind of financial breathing room or material comfort or financial freedom, or I won't be able to support a family, or I won't be able to afford a home. And it's easy to feel like those are big risks in life. And the more kind of Western and capitalist the place you live in is, the more likely you are to be sensitive to those things. And I don't want to gloss over or, invalidate those. Like, if you experience it, it's real. Like, I don't want to diminish that. But I fear that they are actually small risks. Because I can't get away from the idea that life is about way more than what you own. Okay? And how much money you have. And nothing, nothing I've experienced or read has really pointed me in a very different direction. So for me, there is, I don't have much income at the moment, personally. I'm not trying to glorify that. I'm just not swimming in cash, right? But to me, the real risk is there's things I could do that would there's many things I probably could have done the last 2-3 years to start earning more money, immediately. But I fear that the real risk is wasting your life for things that in the pursuit of things that probably can't even provide you as much joy as you think, and often are just a longing for relief. Our desires and what we want in life is so often just conditioned. And there's not often a lot of intrinsic joy in the things we seek, even the career things we seek. We've talked about that a lot the last couple of months. It's easy to... The property in fast cars and fancy clothes is like the most obvious layer of this kind of extrinsic bubble.
Yeah.
Right? It's the cliche midlife crisis stuff and all that. So it's easier. There's lots of commentary about that. There's less commentary around, I want a promotion. I want to start my own business. I want to, I want to become an author. I want to... So these are things that maybe there's not so much social suspicion around, these kind of ambitions and stuff. But articulated that way, those things to me are very dangerous on an existential level. Because there's so often a vague aspiration that's built on, I want to be something more than I am now. More in the unhealthy sense than the healthy sense. I want to feel like I've achieved. There's so many achievement addicts, especially in the West, and I'm probably one of the worst of them, or have been. And these ones, we don't have as much societal support. That's so normalized. That's not as obviously like, oh, that's not going to make you happy. That's not as obvious as the fast cars and all that.
There's no stigma.
There's no stigma around that, right? This word I keep hearing, success, like we want people to be blah, 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 successful. I'm like, what does it mean? Like, if you're talking about the real qualities of life, it's just not the word you'd use. You'd never hear Alan Watts using the word success. You'd never use the Anthony DeMello using the word success. You'd never hear about any of those people trying to just blanket say that some sort of vague, what I'm talking about, success thing is this worthwhile thing. It's actually a vague thing that it's nice to have when it just ensues. When you do something that's valuable with good people, and one of the things that happens in a very Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett way is you end up with hopefully an abundance of the material stuff. And I feel like the real risk is, I think I always bring up that 5 years to live. None of us knows how long we have. None of us knows how long we have. There's an assumption of a future that is not material. And I feel like the real risk is not living that. That's the macro. That's the big picture. That's the other end of the risk seesaw. The more people, I talked to someone about this recently. It's like, well, I've decided I definitely want to build wealth, own a property. There's nothing wrong with either of those things. But if they become the solitary focus of someone's life while they're young and in their prime years of hopefully health and options and less burdened by some other familial responsibilities and these things. And that's the biggest thing that we're capable of imagining. That's the biggest thing we're capable of imagining. It's by necessity narrowing what doesn't need to be narrowed. It doesn't need to be narrowed. Someone who doesn't have to think about whether they can afford a house is like a Warren Buffett or something like that. And a lot of other people who haven't had to agonize over that goal and break down milestones towards it and stuff like that, because the nature of engaging in the real world is that you start to understand things and you start to understand people really well. And on that process, I think we find a lot of opportunities to create the sort of value that people can monetize and help create a sustainable lifestyle around. And that's God, if that's possible, why wouldn't we all want that? A much less strained and agonizing, arduous version of building a materially comfortable lifestyle or abundance. So this idea of the risk seesaw is not just in the personal life. I think it's on the bigger, political scale. So if you think about it, I can just rattle off some examples because the principle is, to me, another fundamental. Children, raising children. The more you try to protect a child from the brutality of the world, the more fragile you make them, coming back to Taleb and fragility, and the more that they will break the first time they're challenged because they can't withstand smaller shocks and disappointments. Right? The more we try to wrap an economy in plaster and hide from people that what we do is like what we do with money and all this sort of stuff, the more we create this disaster that's magnifying in size, the bubble keeps expanding. And when it eventually crashes, it's bigger than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taleb says the Titanic saved more lives.
Yeah.
Than it probably killed.
Yeah.
But that's not tangible. So all these, when I talk about the actual big risk, the long end of the risk seesaw, the problem is that they're not very tangible because they're so big. When people haven't had a meaningful life, it's not very visible. It's not like they commentate on it. All right? It's not easily observable. What is easily observable is possessions. And so that's where a lot of the bias comes from. You see what people have materially.
Yeah.
You don't understand what their relationships are like. So the more you focus on a lot of these career goals and ambitions, it's like, because the risk is I won't be somewhere by the time I'm 30 or 40 or 50. I wouldn't have lived up to my potential. I wouldn't have achieved anything worthwhile. Those feel like big risks, but I think they're small risks. I think the big risks are unnecessarily isolating yourself from connection to other people and connection to yourself. I think the big risk is not being able to tap into we talk so much on this podcast about intuition and gut. And a lot of intellectual society and Western society has drowned us in so much noise that we can't harness the most vital resource, the most powerful form of intelligence we have. And we try to use what's designed to do about 5% or something of our thinking, we try to use that 100%. And we're stretching this tool that's not meant to be used that way. Building the society around us is literally an expression of ego. Because that's what 100% of this is. It's not what it was designed to do. You're overexerting it. We're asking it to do too much. And so the manifestation of the world we have and how so much mental illness, what people call mental illness, I don't like the term, and dissatisfaction people have with themselves and lack of self-esteem, and physical health conditions that seem like they come from physical causes and all that, and how the real things that are going on in people's lives are hidden in this iceberg effect beneath the surface, is completely a manifestation of giving the ego too much power in individual life and not being aware that that's what's going on. It's just in everything. Education, the more we try to reduce the risk that people won't be successful in society, the more we take away their ability to actually think independently and freely and express themselves authentically in their life, and therefore be creative. That's the big risk. We mistake my kid's not going to be successful, or these students aren't going to be successful in get into university. We mistake that to be the big risk. I think it's usually the small risk. And so all these things are a matter of perspective. So, I'm not going to glamorize like the way I've spent times I've been out at dinner thinking, shit, like what's the bill going to be? I don't know if I have enough. Not enough, but like this is going to sting my wallet, and it'd be nice if I had a bit more of this and a bit more of that, or a place to myself or something like that. There's been lots of those moments. And I'm not saying that that's glamorous necessarily, right? I'm not saying it's necessary for everyone to go to experience that. But something I say a lot is that what looks like a sacrifice to you of what someone else is doing might not always be a sacrifice to them.
That's your own perception.
It's your perception. Someone who gave it, like the Ash Barty of like a world #1 tennis player, still many years left, what someone would expect in her career, but like, this isn't serving me anymore. I'm walking away. It's like gave it all up. But it's not a sacrifice if you're not getting joy from that. Just because plenty of other people project their values onto you doesn't mean that constitutes value. That's it. What's valuable and enjoyable is a totally individual assessment. The more you focus on financial wealth, the financial form of wealth, a very limited form of wealth, I would struggle to call it wealth. I'd call it being rich, but people don't like to use rich anymore. Too dirty, so they use the word wealth. But the more you focus on that, the more you'll probably neglect, like the risk seesaw of that is the more you probably neglect the real source of wealth in life, which is kind of has more validity from a health perspective and stuff, which is the quality of your social connections. And you know what? Even when it comes to your career and your income and all that, I gotta say, having a bloody rock solid group of people, you know, your friend, the best sort of network is a friendship group. People you have real relationships with.
Yeah.
People you have a real friendship with will introduce you to someone who can help you a lot in any given thing in their network for nothing in return from you.
Mm.
Totally non-transactional, just because they love you. You know, you would do that for me in a heartbeat, and I'd do the same for you. I wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't have to pander up to me. You wouldn't have it's like, hey Joe, you know so-and-so, can you like introduce me?
Mm.
You know, like I would love to work. I admire their company or something like that, or I need tips or advice. Even when it comes to the game, navigating the game, the quality of your relationships is a huge factor. It's not everything. You're not necessarily going to be the richest person just because you got the best friendships, but it far outweighs it. It far outweighs it because it predicts quality of life. I must say, from personal experience, having an abundance of people I can call on. I said to someone in the community a few months ago, we're talking a lot about investing and stuff, and I said, well, my perspective has changed because a lot of it to me is just a distraction from better things in life. Even though if I concentrate on it, there would be more money in there. I said, I think I'm one of the wealthiest people I've ever met, but I haven't been paid a lot of money in quite a while. And I don't know if this is just personal preference. It seems like from what we know about people and life, that this is just generally, there are things that are just bound to be more valuable. But I don't disagree that your perspective around the value of those things can be heavily warped, which is where a lot of disagreement will come in here. Because when we talked in the last episodes about when your mind switches to those linear tracks and pathways and reward pathways, people become a much less kind of rewarding kind of asset in your relationships, and conversations and stuff go way down in the pecking order when you're on the pleasure treadmill. I don't know if you can relate. Feel free to disagree with me, but that's how I felt. It's like when you're pursuing your goals and all that stuff, people are like, when I've got time or when I can fit you in. Yeah, you put the other pebbles in first, and you're like, do I have room in the jar for this?
You start wanting agendas.
Yeah.
And like being very specific and not sort of doing things for the sake of them, catching up with someone for the sake of them.
Yeah.
For the sake of it, sorry.
Yeah.
You're more like, is this going to move me from A to B? Is this going to...
Fuck, I've done it.
Yeah,
I've done it. I've done it so much.
What I've found is...
I'm just very, very transparent about that. None of us here are perfect.
But no. Well,
yeah.
I still, as I said, I still, as you know, as I have many conversations with you, go from left and right.
Yeah.
Always trying to find the center again.
Yeah.
But I feel there's a very particular feeling of chasing money and stuff like that for the sake of it.
Yeah.
It feels hollow, there's no
substance,
deeper sense to it. Whereas, for example, if you're I don't know, going for a run with someone and you're connecting with them and you're just having good conversation, it feels more meaningful. But there's no what goal, what are you what are you moving towards? Nothing.
It's just a shame that run doesn't fire you up the corporate ladder, eh?
Yeah, that's a good point. But that's the same with when you have a good meeting with someone and you're like everyone. A lot of people want to, you to have a agenda items, take notes, make sure But some of the best conversations are podcast-like, where, for example, I recall having conversation with a potential customer and we're just talking.
To me, an agenda is almost like a point where I'm trying to do too much. Therefore, it needs to be written down.
Well, it's a tactical thing.
It's very tactical.
Yeah.
I'm not going to deny people are going to have to do that stuff because of work situations they're in that are more than fair enough, but I suspect they're not the ideal places to be in.
You know what it's like? It's like, why are we doing... You ask the question, why are we doing this in business?
Yeah.
And the answer is, we've got shareholders. And it's like, that's the thing. You lose track of we've got shareholders.
Shareholders, the non-essential
value.
people who are there to help increase the capital flow and liquidity of the company so that you can do more business on a higher level.
Yeah, but
that's what they say. It's circular.
Yeah.
You're doing it for shareholders, but the only reason shareholders are there is so you can do more.
Increase the value.
But the reason you're doing more is for the shareholders. But the reason the shareholders are there, and we create bubbles.
But then
ego creates bubbles.
You see this. I know this I've observed it in, telco industry, and probably people looking from the outside understand what happens when you do things for short-term shareholders to increase profit is, key example, offshore everything.
Yeah.
That's not going to erode your business, is it?
That's a very risk seesaw example.
It's like,
we'll reduce the short-term thing of the cost of customer service, right?
Yeah, or another one, another classic.
But create a huge bubble, which is like invisible. Yeah. That's the problem with the big risk. They're harder to see.
Oh, it's so visible.
So you don't want to be creating hard to see huge risks. That's my warning.
Yeah, well,
this is what happens in politics, economics. That's what happens in society.
It's a macro thing.
It's a macro, right? Yeah. But also within your life, big picture versus little picture. Within your own life is a story, but we have this societal thing of the risk seesaw.
But the money...
And other people do it to us. And this is what a lot of Taleb stuff is trying to help.
Yes. But
create awareness around.
Money chasing all these things can make macro things tangible. Like it can give you a sense of what I'm doing. Oh, well, I'm doing this, and I'm, the society says this.
Yep.
That means what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis is it's like a link that you make.
Well, we're talking about this with attachment. And one of the things that happens when you're attached to something, right? You don't love it freely and openly, and there's a clinging to something. Is that, and there's a need for it, and it creeps up on you. Is that you can't value intangibles. You can't assess them. The capacities of your brain to assess non-linear and be creative are severely diminished. So things that are intangible get discarded. It's like, what are things that are tangible? When we say tangible, tangible is black and white. Things that are visible. Things that are measurable, that can be denominated in numbers. These are tangible things, right? Money is so tangible. That's the real kind of corruptive nature of money, comes from its tangible nature. Not the fact that it's the thing we use to exchange for goods and services. Whereas, funnily enough, in friendship, all the exchanges are intangible.
They're all intangible.
Right? It's an intangible economy. There's an economy there, but it's intangible. You know, like I'm trading things for supposedly uneven. And this is at some point with our evolution, our social evolution and other evolution, it's probably one of the most ridiculous things I've ever said on this podcast. We're going to have to transcend monetary systems.
It does sound very kumbaya.
It does. It sounds so fluffy. And you'll never hear an economist say it. Because an economist can't say it.
No.
They live within a world of which that is one of the default assumptions, is this monetary system. Because why do we have money? One of the thinkings is, I don't know if there's other reasons and about being able to control people through debt and stuff like that, but one of the uses, even if it was not the original reason, is to exchange things of uneven value. Right?
Yeah.
If I make cars and you make coffee cups,
how are we going to
trade? I don't want 10,000 coffee cups, right?
Or
but you want a car.
60 apples.
Right? But I want pans. You don't make pans. But if you have this money thing that we all use to exchange things, then you can get a car off me and I can get pans of so-and-so, right? And then we can just coordinate in larger groups.
It's pure utility.
Utility, right? And some people will argue that the actual reason for money is so we could have debt, so you could loan and whatever, right?
Sure.
And that doesn't matter as much as the real things in life are not... I had this conversation last night, and this person, I just was very grateful to have the conversation with me. It's almost like they feel like they didn't deserve it, right? And I'm just laughing at the end because they're thanking me so much. I'm almost like telling them, shut up, because this is not a generous act. This is a joyous act.
Our good friend Michael Gill always says when I used to say to him, Michael, thank you so much for know your time. He's like, I gained from this too, right?
It's the biggest reward you could have in life. That feeling of having a proper conversation.
It's true.
I had a blog post. People loved it on Instagram. I put it called "Conversation Sex." It's like that. That's the framing. It's euphoric, and it works the same way. The more you give to your conversation partner, the better the conversation-gasm. Or you can keep going with the metaphor.
Yeah,
but
I'm sure you got it.
The joy of it is that if you come with your one coffee cup and you're like, Joe, I brought you a coffee cup. Thanks for making me the car. And I found joy out of making cars for some reason. And I go, thanks for that. You didn't have to do that. Here's your car. And the real payment was a conversation we had because we have love for each other. Right?
That's another word.
How kumbaya?
People.
Kumbaya warning.
He just said love.
Ding, ding, ding. The kumbaya bell's ringing.
That was Asian.
It sounds too simple. Sounds unrealistic.
Yeah.
I can tell you, that's the only hope we have for our future. To remove a lot of the bullshit that wades into life. Because until we're at that place, because it's not, that's the real nature of that real connection between people is an uneven value. Otherwise, you start to commodify everything. You have a Western society where old people are just in the way. Build something where we can put them so we don't feel bad about ourselves for where we put old people. Because what value do they provide? And the reality is, as you know from Gilly, his 75th birthday, they have all the value in the world. But it's intangible. It's wisdom. But wisdom doesn't always translate linearly into career or business success. It does help.
Yeah.
It helps more than anything, actually, but it's not a linear. It's not, I learned this and I'm going to apply it and I make more money next week. Right?
But how about on the opposite side, people that have success in that domain, people assume they have wisdom.
Yeah.
And it's not.
It's so true. No, they're not very well correlated. They
can
be.
They
can be.
Yeah.
A lot of people who've made a lot of money tend to have gone through something to really get to that position.
Yeah.
And so what they tend to be, there'll be a lot of wisdom, but there'll also often can be a lot of attachment. And the attachment creates massive areas. It's like Voldemort in Harry Potter. It's like he is so adept at certain types of magic, but because he doesn't understand love, he doesn't understand why some of his followers are betraying him because they care about their son or something. He just can't understand that. So he's like, well, they're being loyal. So you have these huge blind spots despite proficiency in a certain room.
Yeah.
Your big picture view is like shit. So that's what we get a lot of. And that's very risk seesaw too. You over optimize for one thing in life and you become a master at it. And we have all this bullshit in this ambitious, hungry society we have of become the best at something. Become the best at something, become really good at something. Find something you're really good at.
Why?
I think why? You tend to just find things you're good at by just being yourself. That's too kumbaya for people.
That's what, I was talking to a friend and he was talking about swimming.
Yeah.
And he's referring to, I used to be really good at swimming.
Yeah.
And then, but it's like, it was so, said, oh yeah, I was good at swimming, but I gave it up. I said, why'd you give it up? And he's like, because I fucking hated it. But he knows so many people that just persist with it for so long.
Yeah.
And they hate it.
Do you feel like I feel like there's a lot of people do that with running too. Not you or Dom.
With running professionally, or if they're really talented, there's a burden.
I have a feeling that I don't know if there's a lot of people who feel like they just got to do running because it's like,
I've been in that zone. I've been in that zone before.
Yeah, exactly.
Being like, why am I running so much? And then you sort of flip between the two, right? Yeah. But then you come back to a center. Yeah. And there's normally...
So the thing with like that Goldilocks zone we talk about is like you got not caring about something on one extreme, like not caring nearly enough. Caring too much on the other end is like attachment, which is like, I have to sell 10 units like right now, or I have to become a really good runner, or this podcast has to be really, really high quality. Has to be really, I'll pay you for feedback. How do I make the podcast like 10 times better? Yeah, there's that. Ridiculous.
Then you end up doing
in the
it
middle.
like this.
In the middle is what Luke and I call this Goldilocks zone, which is the just right, which is the non-attached, which is the love, which is, oh yeah, like, don't want to make the podcast shit, but like, not going to get too controlled about it, because actually the way to make it the best is to make it while we're in the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah. It's like being completely unprepared for a podcast episode versus having 16 questions that you need to ask sequentially.
And you just ask them sequentially. It's the shittest episode you'll ever listen to.
Yeah.
And so there's this really important thing, this risk seesaw of like, it's control. It's seeking control. Like, I've done this with the podcast. I started to try and optimize this podcast a lot. And you'll see a period where the thumbnails are like really, there's much more clickbait effort gone into them and stuff and all that. And I'm going to leave them there.
Yeah.
Just so people can see the trail of my psychology over time.
Think and Grow Rich in my bookshelf.
That book brought the shit out of me.
I keep it there, and there's highlights and like pages and stuff like that.
Dear future Luke, this is going to be how you get rich. Remember, this is.
But it represents the psychology, like the frame of mind I was in. Leave it. 18, and
there's nothing to be ashamed of.
I'm not. Yeah,
I've got mine. I'll leave it up there forever, and I use it to show people like the stages I've gone through.
But you learn things from that.
You learn.
It's like when I read Jordan Belfort's book, Way of the Wolf. Or whatever it is. Yeah, it's actually, it's quality, but it's so open to be used in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And for example, they were brokers of sharehold. They were share brokers. Or,
stockbrokers.
Their one goal was to be rich.
Yeah.
They didn't care about their clients. Look, watch the movie. That's how it can be used.
It is, and not only that. What's worse about that stuff is it implies so. It's not actually, I don't think there's actually much value in that stuff, really. Even though you like the tactic, I hear you. There is that. But what the real thing that's going on, and this is very hard to understand for someone who's too logical and non-appreciating the value of intuition and feeling and things, is that beyond the words, there's a value system that comes with it. Right? And by the nature, the people who are most tactical and advice are the most come from ego.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the ones not from ego are very feeling. Like it's I'm naturally being me, and this is something I do well by most people's standards, and gets results I want from just being me.
Yeah.
That stuff comes with a value system that's not, you can't see in any sense, they're not telling you how to be about people in any sentence or paragraph. It's underlying, it's beneath it. And that tends to be way less useful than all the little. So you have to go through the work of actually going through that. You have to transcend that on your own to take what is intelligent from what they're saying.
But I'll be honest, for example, in my earlier sales days, I just wanted to sell heaps of stuff.
Yeah.
And even though I read all the stuff, even though I read all the books, I honestly don't reckon it did that much. I reckon it was just.
I don't think it would.
I think it was literally just. I learnt heuristically.
It's very much a lecturing birds how to fly thing.
It's like I got there and I just started talking to people and I was keen to do sales.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's actually something deeper that's going on. I think a lot of people read. They're actually they're refreshing and revalidating their opinions and ideas. It's like an energy thing. You know what I mean? It gives you a bit of a lift.
But
it's not actually about the...
Well, okay.
It's not about memorizing the words,
it's
right?
Not. The very first book I read on sales was... I can't remember what it was called. Something like... I can't remember the name, but it was all based on enthusiasm, right?
Yep.
Be enthusiastic.
Yep.
And I took that one thing and I was like... Because you can have bullshit enthusiasm. Like bullshit.
You can.
And you can have
I love the podcast.
Yeah. Oh my God. And do you know about this? And it's like... it's too much. But you can have... If you think about enthusiasm in a general sense, like to just be excited about showing up and talking to people, it comes across. And then you make a connection.
Gilly enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you make a connection with that person.
Those sort of people change a room. Nick, who I was with this morning, says, I just love watching Gilly at Cool Mac at the cafe.
Yeah, yeah.
It's something to watch. Just the way he's greeting everyone and all that. And there's an aura. That's where auras come from. They emanate out from you. And this is the intangible part of life that, especially in Western society, we have barely tapped into. But my original thread for that conversation we had was even trying to over-optimize something like the podcast. Because people are like, what's wrong with developing the podcast? What's wrong with growing the YouTube channel? What's wrong with getting more subscribers? And the answer is nothing. But there's a lot wrong with agonizing over it. And the funny thing I ended up in, the little headspace I ended up in, was the problem with trying too hard on the podcast is the podcast is not my goal.
Yeah. You mean the production quality?
Now I enjoy podcasting.
Sure.
Okay, I enjoy talking, but the overall goal is something beyond a podcast. Okay, and it's probably something I couldn't even put into words, but the closest I've ever come is open doors for others. Right, the surrender of that journey we talk about of like, you don't know what's coming. So this 1,000 doors journey, the best way to actually unlock it is to open doors for others. Take yourself down a peg and look at yourself as part of this team. And your role is, you are inseparable from that team. And the podcast is just one tool for helping to relay that. As soon as I take the podcast too seriously, it serves something greater than itself. Right? But as soon as I over-optimize for the podcast, it's taking all my energy into the podcast. It starts to become from a place of ego. And once I'm in a place of ego, we talk about all these things. I can't value intangibles as well. Can't see big picture things as clearly. Don't feel as good. More existential flu. And you're taken away from what's the actual, for this one, the actual purpose of it.
You start thinking...
Because I have to live that. It's not just... This is not only done... I don't just pause this podcast and I go out and I try and sell people on personal development courses at any cost and save up to buy Ferraris. And
you wouldn't have much skin in the game, would you?
I kind of do try to... It's not just this thing that only happens on podcasts. It's this thing that happens in life.
I think we have a text podcast every day on WhatsApp.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We do. And... The funny thing is, people are like, but don't you, like, if you grow the channel, you'll reach more people. Like, duh, Joe. And, well, that is not necessarily the highest goal. Because reaching people is one thing. But really communicating with people on a deep level is another thing. And anything that diminishes that capacity is an unworthy cost. Volume is very deceptive. Because it's best to go deep for something like this and then be able to go elsewhere, horizontal, than just horizontal. And tactical often becomes more shallow, right? And that's the trade-off. This is the risk seesaw. If I'm not living it, if I'm not doing this, if I'm someone different with my family than I am with people in the community or how I am on this podcast, and there's somewhere I justify it, I start a very dangerous cycle. And I live hypocrisy. You're living hypocrisy. And those things happen, the more you get I get attached to, if it's the podcast, I get attached to and zoomed in on the podcast. If I start getting frustrated about how many YouTube views there were on a video, where the fuck am I in terms of on the spectrum of awareness? No way.
I think I would disqualify you as having a self-awareness podcast.
Yeah, or exactly. Exactly. So it's this idea that be very careful what you optimize, because most people optimize for very tangible, low-level things, and they confuse them to be the goal. Podcasting is something I would say that is rewarding in its own right.
In the same way having conversation is.
Exactly. But there's no way someone's whole life is their podcast.
No.
So if you get in a headspace of feeling constantly fatigued and disappointed and unhappy because of the way a podcast is going, and that lingers for too long, then you've probably veered away from the healthy reality zoomed out view.
What would you have if the podcast was the thing? What do you talk about?
The problem. So well said. So well said. And this is the risk seesaw, you know, like even in the things that are like you know, investing and stuff, like, even those situations, like the more you try to like figure it out, the more you block like the bigger investing opportunities, right? The more you are zeroed in and attached to like property at all costs, for example, you might miss like much bigger opportunities. We had an investing episode where we talked about like, if you find things you love and then naturally find the opportunities related to what you love, that's a very integrated way of, you know, handling your material and, you know, commercial life without having to be consumed by it, right? And the more we get attached to like something like financial freedom or the concept of passive income and all these things, the more we actually just make this risk, we pull the seesaw down. And so the big thing is you might miss out on a much more rewarding way of doing that. But also we overcomplicate things. That's the counter to this. Right? Also we overcomplicate, like, I want a place to live. I saw a place, I like it. And so a lot of the sort of people that, you know, the high achieving sorts and all that, feel like they're too good for mediocre things. It's almost like, oh, I can't buy property, or I can't work a 9-to-5 job because it's too conventional. And they feel like they need to avoid those things because they're too highbrow. And this comes up a lot in conversations with people. And it's the opposite. The more you're trying to be someone glorious and big and high achieving, the more you miss the risk seesaw is you probably miss the real joys in life and the simple solutions that's staring you in the face. They just don't have a glory label on them. And so it's not just avoiding what you think are mediocre everyday things. It's just understanding where they serve you and where they don't. And not caring what some idiot with, you know, glasses and on a podcast, or his dickhead mate who's a sleazy salesman and runner, or what anyone else thinks. And that is and there is why I brought this into failures, because I think the way people think about risk is the wrong way. I think it's just a real oversimplified view of risk. Because I say to some people who have gone out to do what they're really interested in, and they go, yeah, but I took a risk and hopefully it works out. Like maybe Matt Chalk is traveling the world, and so-and-so who quit his job he hated in marketing. He goes, yeah, it's a risk. I go, it's not a risk. It's conservative.
It's true.
I'm the most conservative person I know. You know, like, I won't go on big rides. You know how the way you do one thing's the way you do everything? I won't go on big rides. You know, I won't go skydiving. I'm not open to trying it because I'm like, there's a chance I'll die. I live on the beach. I hardly go in the water. It's like, there could be a shark. Like, how worthwhile is swimming, as beautiful as it is, if there could be a shark? Just because it's unlikely means, well, I'll just avoid it altogether. Yeah. I'm the most conservative person I think I've ever met. Yet when people look at me if you look at me through the lens of career, and you kind of neglect the other stuff, I probably look like a risk taker. I don't own a property. I won't have financial freedom by the time I'm 30, and you know, like, I don't have a proper job.
Didn't pursue what you studied.
Didn't pursue what I studied. I've hopped and changed industries every couple of years, I think. So I probably look like in society's the societal lens, probably look like a risk taker. I think I'm just so conservative, because the real rewards in life are the people. And I think, like, you know, you can't... Going on holiday is like the safest bloody investment there is, because it's so hard not to enjoy it. Yeah. And if you have gone on holiday, if you spent 2 years traveling at any point in your life, like, it's like, well, you know for sure that you enjoyed those 2 years. To me, that's conservative. The thing where we go, oh, I need this much money so I can have that thing one day. To me, that's the risk, because you don't know if you'll actually enjoy that or not, if it'll bring you the fulfillment you think it will, if it'll even last as long as you think it will last. And you don't know, and then you got the Jim Carrey thing. You don't know what bloody thing will go wrong along the way of your safe path. So to me, that's the risky route. The risky route is never having lived or creating a reason in your head why you shouldn't be living properly now in a simple and beautiful way. I've definitely done it, but that's the big risk I try to control. And we talked about this the other day. You talked about, like, I don't really work for an organization. You know, I don't have anyone, as many like people managing me or anything like that, or I have to manage as many people, right? So it's kind of much less attached to the regular world. And that is a risk management, because the more complex business stuff or whatever I've been doing, the more things can go wrong.
Yeah.
The more things that can take away my headspace unnecessarily for me. I don't know if I'm just avoiding those things, but to me it's like, well, what's the point? If it's this annoying, what's the point?
It's valid.
I don't know. It's just my perspective. I don't know in what ways I'm being short-sighted. I'm still probably we're still probably at the early end of life. So I don't know what information I'm not factoring in or anything. But this is the thing. This is the real interesting change. And there was something else, but I kind of forgot it. I was going to say, but that's okay. So in the concept of worrying about failing, it's almost the opposite, because we've talked about so often the gift if you fail, the slingshot. And to recap this series in a nutshell, we talked about Astro the dog, 1,000 doors, all this stuff. So this is why I come to like the idea that the myth of failure. Because if your fear is not always a very good reflection of what's the actual situation, right? And it doesn't actually come from you. It doesn't come from the essential you, the natural you. So that's Astro the dog in that. If the best things that can happen to you are things that you couldn't have actually tangibly imagined, which is the kind of 1,000 doors thing, then your planning and goal setting is very difficult. And all the other things you talk about, fixed and growth mindset, and that the challenges are actually, it's your attitude towards the challenges more than anything else that counts. Not the likelihood and the odds and all that sort of stuff, right? And you bring in a lot of anti-fragile and slingshot and Chinese farmer and all that, and it's that the things that go wrong are actually gifts in disguise, which is the same as the similar to the risk seesaw idea. We had the 75 years of time idea, that Alan Watts thing, that if you could control it all, you wouldn't really want to, which is also a very 1,000 doors-ish kind of message. And you got this U-curve of certainty and all that, and it's like the fundamentals and the long-term and the asymmetric bets that if you just sort out the survival needs you have, as long as you survive, you stay in the game long enough, the odds are, if you have a long-term view and perspective, the longer term your view and perspective is, the more likely things will turn out and you'll win in any given way. So if that's all true, there's nothing really to fear. Yeah? And the sum of these perspectives, I think, takes away the attachment to anything. To the image you have of what successful looks like, of trying to keep up with everyone else, the fear you feel, how to break that down into chunks and approach it slowly and get better as you go. And, me with books, every book is a degree. Everything is just learning, with also hopefully some paycheck in there. Approaching something greater, always approaching something greater, but always content with the now. This is just one of the many lines of thinking you can go through to come to the Gillies good old conclusion. With all this stuff, just be. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of intellectual mumbo jumbo bullshit and everything we talked about in this series. Don't try and remember it. Now suspend it and just feel, right? And just walk into what you really want to do. And if you don't want to be a poor artist, but you love art, then get a job.
And do
alongside.
Yeah.
Get a part-time job or something where you work till 3 and allow plenty of time to protect the role of art in your life. And do it in a way that it's visible, where you might get the asymmetric bets of other people. And if you don't want to do anything else and you'd rather be having more basic meals at home but doing your art, then quit everything and do art. And if you're worried about what other people will say, remember that hopefully they say something bad, because that's the best thing that can happen to you, because that's the slingshot, and that will develop your strength. And that, that inevitably strengthens you as long as you're anti-fragile of mindset. And there's no greater way to develop that strength than through challenge. You are the size of the obstacles you face yourself with. And you're left with, if you really feel this stuff to be true, you're left with nothing else than just living the life you are compelled by deep down to go out and do and live. And that's all you're left with. Everything, every single tether is cut. And that's a good place to be, I think.
Just be.
Do you have anything that stood out? Is there anything from what we talked about in this bank of episodes that was terribly new or striking to you? Is there anything in particular? Doesn't have to be.
No, not really. Just new understanding of stop thinking so much.
Yeah.
And just be more present.
Yeah.
And go into life a bit more blindly, actually.
Isn't it?
Blind to your thoughts and to your ego.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
it really is. Which is in itself anything but blindness, isn't it? It's total seeing. Oh, thanks, Luke. Really enjoyed the series. Thanks for your help, as always.
No
indulging
worries.
My crazy whims. And a reminder to anyone that listens to, more than any other call to action, to reach out. Any way you can find a way to reach out, or applying to Constant Student, because that tells me a bit about you, and then I can meet and had some lovely people do that. So it's a great way to kind of connect with you awesome out there. But we definitely want to hear, or I especially want to hear from you. Not anything in particular. I just want to know your story and what things you think about and talk about it. And we do actually want you to reach out. Unless at some point in the future this has like 4 million views or something, then we're probably getting inundated, and then don't reach out.
Joe's probably
unlikely.
This is
unlikely. Disclaimer. There's disclaimer.
You're probably somewhere in, I don't know, an offshore land.
Yeah.
Hiding from everyone. Probably in a forest riding.
No, I'll have time for 4 million Zoom calls. That'll be fine.
Yeah.
No, I'm assuming it won't come to that. So please feel free to reach out, and
I'll be the recipient of passive income.
Luke will receive the passive income. I'll just get the conversations.
That's good.
And remember, guys, keep opening doors for others.
Keep opening doors. That's not in my line, is it?
You can say it. It's supposed to catch on like a movement.
I think just be.
I think it's good if you just say it. I just like guns under the table. Go say it. Tell them to.
And always remember, open doors for others.
That's the way. All right. Thanks again, Luke.
Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.